Thanks, everyone. I'm glad we could all be in this room in a hotel to talk about hospitality. Yeah, I can see why that graph would have that result because, quite frankly, when we talk about hospitality, there's so many different facets of it that might involve AV. It might be the conference rooms, it might be the hotel room itself, it could be all the entertainment venues and restaurant spaces in a hotel. There's a lot of AV in and out of a hotel, and where else can we put it is always the question. And also, how can we work more closely with actual hotel brands and hospitality brands to put more technology in their spaces? So we're going to talk about all that today. But I think what we saw from those videos just now, from Convene and from W, there's a lot of, it's all about experience. You guys might have heard that a couple times at this conference. It's all about how we're making the humans feel in these spaces. And from those videos, it looked fun. Like, I actually would work at Convene because it looked like cool. And then the W, of course, I would party on a rooftop, anytime. But so basically, how can we make these spaces alive with our technology? And I think my esteemed panelists today will be talking a little bit about how we're creating new atmospheres in these spaces, how we're drawing new people in, and where and how we might find technology in those spaces. So to get started, I was going to have each one of my panelists introduce themselves and say what their current role is, and then maybe just to get into the topic a little bit, reveal your most favorite hospitality experience from recent months. So yeah, start
Great.
with Paul.
I'm Paul with ARUP, and at ARUP I'm sort of bringing together my two lives of being an audiovisual consultant and integrator and being a user experience expert at a manufacturer. And so bringing user experience, and I focus on sort of what I refer to as the sensory layer of a building. So the things that we interact with as humans, and the building offers us as humans. That layer of the building is what I'm focused on. And in hospitality, that layer is probably the most deeply connected to a human, because in hospitality, you ingest the product and you sleep in the beds, and you really have these deep touch points. And so I think that even though I'm a generalist, I think that's part of the reason why I'm here. So I would say that at ARUP we have a broad range of disciplines, like from acoustics to lighting to structural design to everything, and so tying those things together to a full experience is why I'm here. For me, I was thinking about this, like what hospitality experience I had recently, and it was one that had really nothing to do with technology. It had to do with going to Mexico City and going and staying in an Airbnb, where when I entered the Airbnb, and I'd sort of seen it on the pictures and that sort of thing, but there were these beautiful prints. I like certain art, and these prints spoke to me. They were original prints, which seems crazy to me to put original prints in an Airbnb, and they just really were meaningful to me. And this connection that I had to this space and to the owner behind it, because they liked the same sort of thing that I did. It was really a reflective experience, and I think that's what you always look for when you're looking to be away from home.
Awesome. Michael Judah, Regional Director of Technology for Convene. Convene is, our big catchphrase is we're the easiest place to host a meeting. And as we've grown and scaled as an enterprise, we're looking to service the flexible workspace, hot desking fad, and we could say we're probably a WeWork competitor, although I think we're trying to be better. So I support a team of 35 technology managers and technology specialists who are client-facing technology experts providing AV solutions for a multitude of events, meetings, and also our workspace clients and utilization of technology and the buzzwords like conference rooms and huddle spaces. And thinking about a good hospitality experience, I was going to share my chili story, but for InfoComm this year, I stayed at the Aria in Vegas, and opened the door, and the first thing that happened the second I opened the door was the TV turned on, the shades open, the lights came up, and there was that cool little tablet on the side of the bed that you could order your Starbucks from and have it ready for you in the morning, and you can turn the TV on in the bathroom mirror, and it was amazing. Like any moment I was in the room, which wasn't a lot because it's an InfoComm, I had that thing in my hand and I was like super engaged and just loved the experience of staying in an Aria hotel.
And I'm Pablo Henderson. I'm the Senior Global Brand Marketing Director for W Hotels. While I'm not on the design or tech side of things, I'm doing a lot of the programming that goes into what you ultimately see. We are kind of like the original lifestyle brand at W Hotels, so we've been bringing AV to life in lots of different ways. Favorite recent experience was, I have two, if that's okay. One was that we hosted music festivals around the world, over 11,000 attendees in our hotels, first ever music festivals to happen within the realm of the hotels. And we had live streams going on at the time, and the live streams broke all kinds of records for Marriott. So there's definitely a new appetite for live streaming and enjoying that entertainment. But my favorite experience was probably at a competitor. I stayed at the Line Hotel in Washington, D.C., where they do live podcasting in the lobby of the hotel. And I thought that was just amazing energy, thought leadership to bring to the table.
Very cool. All right, yeah. Well, we like hearing that. Lots of music and lots of the podcasting thing I've definitely seen as something that is a public-facing thing now. People want to go to those like they might want to go to a rock show at this point.
Right there in the heart of the lobby.
Huh. That's really cool. And I think you were saying, when we were talking about this panel, that's a permanent space that's built into the hotel. You know, there's these recording studios you have at the W, there's these podcast booths. You know, this is permanent AV installation happening. And I guess like with that makes me segue handily into our first question, which is, how are you seeing hospitality spaces changing? You know, what cool new things are you seeing implemented, and why are they being implemented? Like, what's the ultimate client draw when we add these spaces?
I think it's experiential in creating a destination. You know, we're utilizing signage and screens now as art decora in many instances. I mean, if you look at one of the properties we just opened was in Arlington, Virginia, in the Gartner Tower. And they have this massive video wall in the lobby, and that this is a commercial Class A building. It's not directly related to hospitality, but the contenting and the programming that they're doing, this thing becomes, it's a showstopper, and it's a showpiece that to the point where even when you're walking by it in the street, you stop and you take a look at it. And at one point they'd done something really cool. They had actually had the wall match the marble flooring, so it just kind of looked like this one seamless piece. And then the last time I was there, they had this really cool like fall landscape thing as well. You know, it's an immersive experience without actually having to directly interact with something.
I think as an industry, hospitality has kind of been rather boring for many. You know, it's one of the oldest industries. It goes all the way back to, you know, the days of the inn, you know, and you provide room and board, but now, thanks to disruptive, you know, things that are happening in the rest of the world, there's a need to respond to what does it mean to be a hotel, and especially a lifestyle brand or an experiential hotel. Those forces that are coming from outside are influencing the way people experience the space that they live in, even if it's a temporary living in that space. You mentioned Airbnb. Those experiences inform all aspects of hospitality. I think that one of the things that you're starting to also see is, you know, as the space becomes more crowded, brands are starting to try to differentiate by making significant claims. You know, they're sticking a flag in the ground and saying, we're the brand of this or the brand of that. And when you make that type of commitment, it allows there to be like long-standing installations.
I like the sort of emerging trend of taking away the in some ways unnecessary parts of the experience in a hotel, for example, being able to go directly to my room and not having to have an interaction that is only there because the technology isn't really ready for just me bypassing the getting my key at the front. So the more you can take away those unnecessary experiences, now you're open for really better reflective experiences that in many cases now, another trend is to bring in a local flavor to a space and help people understand where they are whether it's with technology, and probably it is most of the time, with a screen like you explain, and maybe mapping the city and doing, providing information in that lobby where you're really just passing through it to learn, to have an experience only, not to have a transaction anymore.
Yeah, and how does, it sounds like when we make something local, that's everything from, like the local taco truck being out front, something like that, all the way up through, local artists and bands playing in spaces and bringing art to spaces. I guess, how does AV support this localization in hospitality?
I think part of it has to do with our newfound thirst and appetite for content. We are consuming content constantly. And once we take the eye away from the mobile device or from a screen that we had somewhere else, we are now conditioned to consume content, rich content. So the reader board, which to me for the longest time, speaking to a group of AV professionals, is kind of like table stakes, is no longer part of that formula. The reader board has to deliver a level of value in that content consumption that goes far beyond what time the meeting is and whether it's in room A, B, or C. That content is being delivered in far more dynamic ways now than it ever used to be. And maybe the reader board becomes redundant because that information is in my hand, in my pocket. And that too opens up new opportunities. But only those that are creating content to support the technology can win that game. So the idea is to promote creating more content to force the industry, both hospitality and AV, to look at more progressive ways to display it.
Can that be more interactive now? I remember you were saying a few years ago, interactive displays still intimidated guests. Are you seeing that people would approach those now and want to?
Yeah, I mean, we launched a project in Atlanta some years back that involved touchscreen, and it was too far ahead of its time. It was in 2011, and the guests were intimidated. They didn't want to touch something because, if you're a millennial or a baby boomer, you were taught not to, break things, whereas millennials would walk up to the screen and just break it, literally. So, had we launched the project, a year or two ago, when people had been conditioned to swipe, to touch, to screen up, they would have gravitated towards the screen. So it's time and place, too.
I think that's one of the things that's difficult for us technologists to understand, is what's familiar to us isn't familiar to everybody. And when we think we can roll out a technology that's cool and perfect, it often isn't cool and perfect for the audience, and depending on what audience. I mean, every person has a hotel in some ways. There's a hotel brand for everyone, in other words. What's the match between that person that prefers that brand and the technology that you offer in that brand? A W hotel is going to be very different from maybe a Hyatt Regency, for example. So focusing on that end user from the technology point of view is super important. And I wonder how many people does anybody have someone within their company that owns the end user experience? Is there a dedicated person that advocates for the end user in anybody's company at this point? Because, I wouldn't really necessarily expect it, but I put it out there almost like a thought experiment in that who in your company is asking the question, who is the end user? Who is it, first of all, and what do they need? Because the answer is different for every single job that you do. There's no ubiquitous end user for every job. Every single job is going to have a very unique personality and a very unique set of knowledge and which you have to design for, which you have to implement technology for.
And here we are talking about an industry where the end user can be a number of very different people with different starting points for their knowledge base on how to use that technology.
I started asking AV integrators to send their engineers to come work with someone on my team for a day or two. To really, because I think there's a lot of things that we do that we're pushing the boundaries in the way we're utilizing certain technologies. So I always get that, initial sideways head turn from an AV integrator about, well, why are you doing it this way? And that rapport and that trust that we build over a few months of, look, I know what I'm talking about, right, would be expedited if it was like, come and use the system with the team and how they're using it on a daily basis and really understand why we're doing it this way. It's not something that we're just doing for the sake of doing it. It's necessary as part of our toolkit to operate at a high level.
It's interesting that you talk about the end user and them using the technology, because we ended up building these recording studios in our hotels, and you've got hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of equipment in these spaces, between the software and the hardware and the build out. And we said, if people are going to use the space, it has to come with the engineer. We don't care who you are, whether you're Jay-Z, or you're somebody doing a bachelorette or karaoke. You're going to need to have an engineer.
Expensive karaoke.
And well, people do it all the time. Sometimes people rent them out just to watch a Super Bowl game or something else. But the idea of making sure that regardless of where the starting point was, we were going to set the standard at that this comes with the engineer. And ultimately, professional musicians use the recording studios in our hotels all the time. They have their own producer, their own engineer, but we still have to make sure that somebody shows them how to turn the lights on, how to do some basic things in that space.
Yeah, I think in our spaces, we initially used to have these touch panels. And in one of the first iterations of Convene, the idea was the client could interact with the technology. It'd be a simple plug and play interface. They can turn volumes up and down. And we had these 7-inch touch panels built into the wall. And we started to find that no one was touching them because maybe the baby boomer population, the one typically hosting the meeting, sees this screen as like, I'm not touching that. I don't want to be responsible for breaking something. I'm scared of technology. So we actually just found that was a value add for us as a service, was to provide a white glove service with a technician on site. And even though we're executing with some of the most basic things like connecting a laptop to a screen and putting out a wireless microphone, this became a whole level of service that our competitors weren't providing. So actually now we're taking away some of that control and taking away that technology, and now it's a hospitality service, and it allows my team to focus on the experiential stuff now and actually be engaged with the clients on a day-to-day basis, and actually create a really great meeting experience that they may not get somewhere else.
It's interesting. I assume that a lot of you are expanding your businesses in a similar way, right? Who is offering more in-depth service than they ever have before. And it's exactly right. It's an extension of your revenue, and it really helps the end user. I just do wonder, though, whether we could also implement the other sort of mediator that we all have in our pocket as a way of engaging with the technology, especially. And I know this is happening as far as just room keys, right?
Keyless.
But I think we could do a lot more. It's so frustrating to me. I have to the hotels that do offer Netflix, I have to put my credentials into the TV. I hate that. I don't want to put my Netflix credentials into a hotel's TV. I want to just send my phone or something like that.
Yeah. This kind of all naturally is coalescing with a question that we got from the audience that is something I think we all wanted to talk about anyway. So the question is the hotel industry having a brand name identity crisis? Starwood is now Marriott, and there are now more hotel brands than ever. How does AV help increase brand identity? And I think we were just talking a little bit about that. Like you're talking about how this is asserting who your brand is and how people perceive it in the world. But yeah, how does AV help increase brand identity?
I mean, I think it really depends on the brand. I mean, couple it at the Marriott or Starwood level is too big. You're talking about the world's largest travel company. So you have to break it down to the 30 brands and the different categories and the different profiles of the travelers that are staying in those hotels, from the road warrior that's in the middle America that's staying with one brand and that's their go-to, to the person that's going for that luxury stay and it's a once in a year or maybe once in a decade anniversary type situation, or you're in a remote exotic location, the guest profile is always going to influence how they expect to engage with technology. At the end of the day, the meeting space has always been that go-to. So we think of hotels and we want 200 square feet of meeting space. How can we maximize a big contract and installation and all of that? And you think of AV in those terms, and huge screens for marquee presentations and whatnot. But the lion's share of the industry are not these what we call big boxes. They're hotels that are spread out across the world. And they're a lot smaller, 200-person, 300-person hotels with limited AV needs, but yet they still all have AV needs, and they each have a brand identity. That brand identity doesn't necessarily need to come forward through AV every time. I think that, once again, it kind of comes back to the authenticity of the programs and the purpose of travel, and all the other reasons that you would use the content.
I think that AV can enhance the experience and create a sense of loyalty, but there's so many other verticals and levels of service inside a hotel that will bring you back to that hotel.
Yeah, like for instance, Westin. For instance, Westin is a brand within the Marriott family that has very distinct pillars around wellness. As if I was selling to Westin, for instance, I would not be asking myself, how can I look at the new Westin that's being built in, whatever city, and what their needs might be. My question going to that decision maker would be, how can we use technology or AV to enhance your pillars of wellness? And the minute you shift that question, you've now opened a whole different dialogue that's now speaking to where the stakeholder, the key decision maker, is incentivized to see you as a true working ally and a partner, and not just as a vendor, because those are mutual goals.
That speaks to the complexity of the end user here. We talked about the fact that you've got the visitor, but you've got the hotel owners and their representatives, and are they first or second in your priority of what you're designing for, who we're designing technology for, and then there probably there's you, the AV integrator or designer, and then there's the service people who come in and fix the stuff, and so you're designing for this complex amalgam of users. And one of the things that I find very helpful is to prioritize that complexity and say, okay, this is my primary user. I'm designing everything for them, and I'm checking the other users, the service person, the owner. I'm checking after I design for that primary person, whoever that might be. Then I'm making sure it works for everybody else. It's a complex equation. But it's important when you're putting in the technology and this sort of thing.
And a little footnote to what I just said is that increasingly more of the brands are staking their claim on design. So they're design-led brands. So the solution needs to be a solution that enhances design. Yeah. And that's a new space to be in, because important. Now you remove, yes, there's a functional component to it, but how you're not detracting or how you're enhancing the design.
I mean, for us, one of our biggest steps forward was owning our design in-house and representing the brand consistently from job to job, and working closely with the design team of how does technology support the design and the flow and the client interaction in the space. That was our massive leap forward as a company, and our ability to really create great spaces.
I mean, and that's the other thing is that you should be a part of a pretty complex team of people when we're designing technology. It's not just you. It's not just the architect, or it's not just the project manager. There should be a design representative. There should be a user representative. Obviously, there needs to be. The more people in the room, I find, and maybe it's just me, the more people in the room the more different they are, the more different their perspectives, the better the design is going to be in the end. If you're coming at it from one direction only, you're going to miss the target.
Well, also, you talk about differences. Here we are, the brand is all about standardization to some extent. What makes W a little bit unique is that we try to make every one of the hotels somewhat unique. But you benefit from a brand because people want consistency. But yet, you take a relatively small brand like W with 65 hotels globally, and as you shift from continent to continent, there's a cultural influence that starts to happen, and you start seeing the use of technology completely shift. Our hotels in China are using technology in ways that would not be even acceptable here in the US, because it would be seen as over the top, gaudy, too much in your face. Whereas there, it's next level. The Middle East is a whole other story too. So you start seeing these slight cultural nuances and being able to understand that the stakeholders might be different, especially in an industry where, yes, we do own some hotels and we operate many of them, but a lot of it is within a franchise relationship. And so who is the ultimate decision maker?
That's another question that came from the audience, kind of was related to that. When we talk about localization in hotels, basically, what is the life cycle of an AV content endpoint within hospitality? And we did want to talk about the life cycle. The question continued, do digital content displays and deployments need to be modular, like in retail, or is it a longer-term permanent installation? So do you...
I love this question because it's something that I spend a lot of time thinking about as a designer, working with architects. I really feel, some brands can do this and some can't, but I really feel like we need to build buildings with a really, what I call a quick layer of technology. And what I mean by that is that this technology, you should almost, I think you should put always put, when you put in a piece of technology, there should be a timeline kind of attached to that technology. How long is it going to last? Is it 3 years? Is it 6 years? I find that sometimes it doubles. It's 3 years, 6 years, or maybe 12 years, maybe 24 years. 24 years is probably walls or something like that, actually. So when it's a 3-year product, you don't really want to embed it into the wall. What you really need is a system in which you can change it out quickly. You need this. I think in the last panel she was calling it a platform. You need an infrastructure that is flexible and quick, and with that, then you can respond quickly, because technology isn't really that expensive sometimes to reformat, and you can do a lot. Right?
I don't know if I'm going to agree or disagree.
All right, let's go. Let's
go. The stage fight.
Because the life cycle for the contracts that are written on those major changes are 7 to 10 years. Mm-hmm. So there's no way that the technology is ever going to be able to sync up to that life cycle.
That's right.
So I think I'm agreeing with what you're saying.
You're pointing out a conflict in the system.
But there is, exactly.
Yeah.
So we have to take into consideration that, major renovations, they may happen in different spaces at different times. Obviously, for the hotel owner, it's going to benefit them to potentially, cadence some of that. Basically 7 to 10 years.
I think we need to think about
soft goods get a different life cycle.
The pop-upization of the user experience in these lobbies, especially, where pop-ups are happening a lot everywhere. How do they do it? What is the cheap and quick infrastructure that they use, and how does that influence these longer term?
But sometimes there are pop culture components that are driving these decisions that are far beyond our own control. The perception of what is an acceptable sized television to put in a hotel room. For me, it's different. I grew up in England where we got tiny homes and tiny TVs, but I remember sitting in rooms having long conversations about what is the minimum size of the TV that is adequate for someone to get in their room. Mm-hmm. And that the size of that TV is increased very rapidly as a cultural norm. Whereas I think 10 years ago, you might have looked at a TV that size and said, wow, there's a huge TV in this room. Why is that?
Oh, you couldn't have afforded it, probably.
Well, yeah,
right?
you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's that layer too.
Yeah. It's changing the shape. Yeah, that made me think of something that you said, Pablo, a while ago about the Instagrammable moments versus the individual stories we need to make in these spaces. You know, we talk about the pop-upization of the lobbies and stuff, but it's, you know, there's another opportunity here, you know, for making a space tell a variety of stories. I think, Pablo, you were kind of saying that these Instagram moments, like the one photo that everyone takes and puts on Instagram, that's already over. Now people want their individual signature. They want to be able to photograph and frame things and capture things differently. I guess, how is that changing how you're going to be putting technology in spaces? So.
I think, again, we're using them as things as canvas, right, to kind of attract or pull people to a specific space. So in one of our premier properties on Lexington Avenue, you walk into this video wall that's embedded in this amazing millwork that's around it, and you know we did an event for Pinterest recently. So they're obviously very photogenic, very content forward, content driven, and the way they utilized that wall was amazing because it was a changing landscape throughout the course of the day, and it wasn't just one Instagrammable moment of okay, this is the Instagrammable moment of the morning. Here was the AM break Instagrammable moment, and literally people could just fill up their entire Instagram story of what was happening on this canvas that was evolving throughout the course of the day.
Do you have to have curator support, curatorial support?
Well, a lot of our clients don't always have access to the resources that Pinterest will, or a content creator or a marketing team. And you know, some people are here for a quick and dirty, easy meeting, so they just want something static and easily. So we don't get into the content generation business. That's just a little scary. It's not up our sleeve just yet. So we typically delegate that back to the client.
Okay. Very cool. All right, and I think that was something that, Paul, you were talking about too, these modal screens. You know, is it for information or is it for art?
Oh my God, yeah. I mean, I'm dealing with several projects, in fact, or we're dealing with several projects where everybody wants a big direct view LED in their lobby, right, or in their, but they don't have any idea what they want to do with it, right? They want you to put it in, they don't know what. This is a super important, you know, experiential thing, and the toughest thing is sometimes it needs to be art, but often it needs to be this blend of art and information. And so, are you participating in some ways in that technology art interface, and how can you as technologists that know maybe where to get the data and where to you know, maybe even how to present that information, how can you work with artists and make sure it looks amazing and respects the brand and do all that stuff? How many of you either have in-house content or work very closely with creative agencies? A lot of you have a go-to kind of creative agency or a creative content provider. I think that's, what do you guys do with content, and I assume you have big screens and.
So that is a constant dilemma because we're very fortunate in that we have a large pool of content that we're creating on a regular basis, but it's not formatted for all of the different types of opportunities that arise. Right. So then you're retrofitting something into something that it wasn't really made for that. We do have toolkits that have basic assets that the hotels can download and then plug into their system, and those are formatted for all the different sizes. The thing is context, you know, and again, you know, is the space a transitional space? Is it a place where you really want to encourage people to stand there and look at the loop? You know, you start getting into this need for customization, but also as we move more towards the hyper-local, is it maybe better to have a local solution with a local vendor providing you with something that's going to solve the exact needs of that space? We have it there as nearly a safety precaution so that we can cover our liability by saying, hey, we have a toolkit, you could have used the toolkit, we offer a solution, it's been brand approved. Right. I'm a big proponent of treat each space individually and maximize its opportunity for everything that it can deliver for you.
The content generation is something that goes overlooked a lot of the times. And this is going back to the challenging seller. This is, we have it's a 15 by 3 planar video wall, and it's amazing. But it's something I inherited, and no one in the design and build process ever stopped to say, okay, how are we actually pushing content to this thing? And how are we gonna get a cheetah to run across the screen? Because the first thing a client's gonna do is gonna walk in and say, how do I get a cheetah running across the screen? And now we're in this massive retrofit where we have to undo everything to redo it to have it done in the first place. So I really wish someone had stepped up and said, are you sure this is what you want? Because this is what you can, this is what you're not going to be able to do, versus just saying, okay, great, we'll put in this a great video wall for you.
It seems like a bit of a nightmare to jump into that dialogue, right? I mean, that's not necessarily our expertise as technical people, but you know, get a friend who's comfortable with it and jump into it, because that is where, as you were talking about, the challenger sale, that's that moment where you say, this is all good, but really this is probably the approach you need to take in order to really make this space work. It's not a screen. The screen doesn't matter. Maybe it's a screen or what, but how do you deliver the brand within this environment? And that involves people that are graphic designers and interaction designers and all these people that may not be on your staff, but are definitely out there in droves and can help. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes me think of, actually, when Pablo was saying that you're going to treat each space individually, and you kind of mentioned a little bit working with local vendors. Are you seeing that now you're working with vendors differently in terms of, and I'm talking like AV vendor type people, how is that relationship evolving as you're having to refresh a little more often? Like, do you wish it was a more ongoing relationship? Do you like it better when people show up every few years? Like, what does that relationship look like now?
That's a good question.
I don't know the answer to the local piece, because I think that in the case of a W, for us it's very much about innovation and new and next. So the lifespan of that relationship from a content creation perspective may be somewhat limited. I do think that for a more traditional brand, you know, certainly in the luxury space, you're going to want something that's more long-standing, but also it's going to have a longer shelf life. We're changing things out all the time. And so we operate on these two. In order to be that nimble, we have two layers. One is where it's completely automated and completely standardized. Soundtrack Your Brand, for instance, is our audio partner. So basically, we have a software that all of our hotels have, and we control the music in every hotel at any point in time. And we have an app, and it's all off. Basically, you can pull up on your mobile phone and control the music at any hotel in the world. And so that's the level of standardization, and we don't give anybody any license to break away from that, and we want to control it from the top. And then from a local programming perspective, we say, well, book local bands and local DJs and bring your space to life and invest in these relationships. And so the two things are always happening. And we've spent all of our time talking about screens, because I think screens are the subject of the day, because we're so exposed to them. But the audio is the next frontier for us to conquer, whether it's the music that you hear, the soundtrack of your stay, or what's happening with people experiencing sound in their homes. And so I don't know what new challenges that frontier will bring about, but there'll be curation in that space too. And if you think curating a screen is hard, try curating audio.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think for us, our relationship with the AV integrator at a local level is huge, because we're trying to open 20 locations next year. And you know, these are about $13 to $20 million all in total projects, with AV budgets that range between $600K to like 1.5 or so. I don't have the time to talk to 20 integrators in 20 or maybe like 5 or 6 different cities and teach them our typology. I literally need to have the 1, 2, or 3 partners that have the good local subs that can do the work, but are still going to own the process from the top down and the QA and the commissioning component. And on the refresh thing, we're trying to really, for us to be profitable and where we are, we need to extend the life of our systems as much as humanly possible. And so a lot of what we're getting into is leasing a lot of the hardware, paying the soft costs up front, building the lease into our operating expenses so that when that capital refresh happens, it's just part of our operating existence. That's just, that X amount of dollars a month is just what it takes to do business. And then when we do get into those refreshes, it's less of a hit. It's less of a harder pill to swallow. The soft cost number is always going to be significantly less than the hardware leasing cost over 5 to 7 years. But as much as we'd love to say that technology is evolving and the landscape is changing, the core of presentations, meetings, and events for the past 30 years has been the same thing. You're looking at slides, and you need to hear the speaker. Whether it's someone up there with 35 millimeter and a clicker, or it's a X lumen laser, or whatever new wireless technology, the content is the same. The delivery system changes, and ultimately the user doesn't care. The only user that cares is my team and me, and that piece of equipment is going to work 5, 6, 7 years after its installed date, assuming it's properly maintained as well.
I think that's really interesting. You prompted in me a thought about what spaces need to be really hyper familiar. In other words, everything. I've seen this before, and rooms that come to mind obviously are the room where you're sleeping, your guest room, and your meeting rooms. I mean, those are places you want to mask. You want to be able to really be comfortable with, but then there are other spaces where you want delight and you want surprise and those sorts of things. And those are the spaces where you really want to experiment and where you want to leave a layer of changeability in some ways in order to create a magical experience, because you don't do a magic trick twice, right? I mean, it's useless. So the only way to do it is to make it somehow different every time. And so knowing what kind of space it is with respect to that, I think
that was our response to the business center. We decided to start building recording studios in our hotels. People thought it was a bit of a crazy idea, but we weren't going to take away real estate from functioning space. We were going to take underutilized space. So we looked at the business center and we're like, no one's printing out a boarding pass like they used to. No one's going to the front, oh, can you photocopy? You can just do that right there, right?
Yeah.
No one's going on one of those desktops and using that to figure something out. So we got rid of business centers and started looking at how do we, what is our magic trick for that space? And it's not always going to work, but it's thinking about so out of the box, so unconventional, and looking at the thing that could be staring you right in the face. I agree with you. No one wants to see the bed reinvented, or or the meeting for the presentation. Right. That needs to be exactly what it is. But there are all these little nuggets of spaces in the hotel. The gym is another one.
The bar.
The bar.
That's my comfort zone.
The elevator. I mean, the elevator, we need the basics, but maybe the experience could be different every time since it's.
Well, we were talking about that. The elevator is this core space that's different every time now. There's that, the William Vale in Williamsburg, they always graffiti some Instagrammable phrase on the back mirror so that when you go in the elevator, you can get that selfie moment. And you're definitely talking about the elevator now has to be important visually, but also music has to be cool in there too.
No doubt.
So that's another AV opportunity.
That's right,
yeah. That is my favorite topic with hotels and is the music
Elevators?
part. Elevators. Let's talk about Otis Company, founded in.
They have 12 places
I have
throughout the
another
country.
panel coming on stage to talk about elevators. But no, actually, music. A little bit cooler than elevators, but also in elevators. So I've noticed this trend, and actually I had Pablo on a panel at Infocom this past June about this topic, about live music in hotels. It definitely feels like there's something cool happening there. It's kind of, there's always been music in hotels since the olden times, the Algonquin Round Table and stuff like that, jazz bands and things like that. But I kind of like this new sort of resurgence of bringing people back to hear music. Is that something you're seeing, or am I making that up in my own head?
Yeah, I've actually seen an uptake of music for receptions and bands and jazz cocktail hours, and it's something that we offer as part of an experiential, we have our experiences program, and so we'll have a variety of musical acts that we'll incorporate. It's great because it can really transform the space from that kind of pre-programmed brand standard soundtrack that you have, and you can transform the space by introducing this new element that may not be familiar with the brand or has their set list that they like to play, and that in itself can change the aesthetic, can change the vibe, can change the feel of a space.
Music has become more embedded into our day-to-day life than ever before because of streaming. And when I talked earlier about external forces driving the responsiveness of the industry, whether it's a competitor or disruption, understanding how we interact with day-to-day. So for instance, with the social media, it's about stories, right? It's not even about the post anymore. It's about how you're telling a story on Instagram and all those steps. And now you're incorporating video. So how is the space seen through the video lens? Well, music is now part of the day-to-day because you can carry your entire catalog in your pocket, but you're being exposed to music on a constant basis. And so hotels are now being forced to be responsive to a consumer who is also far more educated today about music than they ever were before. They used to have to rely on the disc jockey on the radio to tell them what was new. People will tell you so much more about, an artist or music today than ever before. And the hotel has to become that cultural epicenter, has to serve as nearly a microcosm of everything that's happening in culture.
There's so many songs I've Shazammed sitting at a hotel
Exactly.
bar.
Yeah, totally.
Shazam has its own charts where you can, follow who's being the most Shazammed artist. And I'd like to think that the hotel plays a big part in that. Something that I wasn't going to talk about today, but I led an initiative this year for us to launch our own record label. And we launched W Records this year. It's been a huge success. We're in the early stages. But we decided to launch with vinyl. Obviously, the music was available for streaming. But what's really brought the concept to life is the live performances that we've been. So we launched at W Times Square, live performance there. Our first artist is off to Formula One for Abu Dhabi.
Cool.
Are you thinking? I know the Ace Hotel in downtown Los Angeles actually bought a big theater right next door to it, and it's the theater at the Ace Hotel where they do music all the time. Is this is W looking at larger venue kind of?
That's a very unique real estate proposition.
It is definitely.
We're kind of asset light in our strategy in general, but from recording studio to live performance to record label, we've now completed the entire process from recording to performance to distribution. And ultimately, when you think of the 110 plus Marriott Rewards members, we also serve the distribution channel too.
Wow.
Well, actually, I just got another question that is something that we wanted to talk about today, so this is perfect. What kind of experience analytics would be valuable within hospitality? And I know that, Michael, you had talked about capturing analytics for room use and stuff. So yeah,
I always find numbers interesting. I think we have an idea that they tell a definite story, but I found that numbers are up to interpretation as much as anything else, right? And I think someone earlier today had spoken about that as well. One of the things that we did, and we partnered with a company, and we actually acquired, not partnered, was occupancy sensors and heat mapping of our spaces to find where people were congregating in our workspaces and in our meetings and event spaces. And that has been one of the best tools in terms of how we're refining our designs for future spaces. Where are we strategically placing technology items? Where are we strategically placing our pantry services? Where are we strategically placing entrances, things like that, and finding the best way to utilize the spaces. Because oftentimes we're lucky, we usually have a blank floor plate, and we can build it from scratch. So we can really tailor the experience based on the data that we are collecting.
Sounds good. You guys taking measurements?
I mean, heat mapping is awesome. There's no argument.
We're definitely building. I think now, you know, as soon as you get into the analytics, there's probably a whole other user that you have to now focus on, because it's not anybody that I really kind of talked about earlier. Now you're talking about some building manager or the back of house people at the brand and that sort of thing. And now you really have to, I think you have to start at the dashboard when you're doing analytics. And that's sort of waving my hands a little bit, but the technology should be driven by what it is that is needed to be actionable on the dashboard. And that dashboard needs to be driven by a human that really wants to do something with those analytics. So you really have to go back and find the person that needs these analytics and understand why they need them. And then you can create the dashboard, and then you can install the technology that would deliver what's needed. And there's plenty of technology to do that. It's just a matter of focusing on the right thing and not just applying, you know, sensors of every sort just because that's the IoT trend.
I'm a marketer, so, you know, the more data, the better. We'll find a way to manipulate it and leverage it to some extent. We did have, you know, with the festivals that we did on property, we did 3 of them, one in Hollywood, one in Barcelona, one in Bali, in quick succession. We used RFID, and that was a game changer. It was my first experience working with RFID, completely cashless environment. All the data that comes back from that, we were able to, you know, time a lot of the behaviors. If we replicate the concept that had, you know, millions of dollars worth of investment in it, we know that we can make smarter decisions about the future. We're not planning on getting into the long-term festival business, you know, at any large scale like Live Nation or any of the big operators, but certainly on the horizon, the hotel environment is going to change, and they're going to be able to accommodate more people for different, more diverse types of events. And I see that as certainly the next level, is being able to mine that data once you get to a level of scale. But you need the scale for it to be interesting.
Yeah, and we're technically in our Q&A portion. And actually, there's one more cue that came in that makes me think of something you were just saying about the RFID and the cashless transactions and stuff. So what is the current position in the hospitality industry of self-serve kiosks? You know, we've seen numerous attempts at self-serve kiosks in hotels. Where are we now? What's going on?
Experience in LA, in downtown LA, one of the hotels I frequent when I'm out in LA. I can check in online. I can enter my credit card information, scan my ID, have the hotel's application, and go directly to my room and never have to interact with a human being, which I'm a social creature. I do like interacting with human beings. But after flying in directly from New York, working a 12-hour day, I've been up for basically 24 hours. I want to expedite the process of getting into bed, and that does it for me. And that's has been amazing. And that technology, just being able to take my phone, open my door, fall down, and sleep for a few hours is amazing.
And you don't need a kiosk. Basically, it's all online.
It's completely it's even removing the kiosk.
In some ways, it's a personal kiosk, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, Starwood and Marriott led the charge on that innovation, and were the first to market with it. And I think have done a phenomenal job at scale. I think as with all the different components of what we talked about, from as something as basic as the, touching a screen, there's an evolution in social norms that have to make people comfortable for us to get to a point where we see that as a solution that's widely adopted. I'm kind of still old school, in many ways. I like having to, I struggle at Home Depot sometimes if there isn't, if there's only
I hate the self-check.
Self-checkout,
Oh my God.
But I think that there are, yet again, there's going to be a brand where that is very appropriate and it feels seamless. And I think ultimately there's a level of authenticity and credibility that's needed for each solution. And so I think the bigger challenge for the future is going to be how do luxury brands start to navigate automation? Because that's where there's a bit of a conflict, right? High touch, yet nobody to actually high touch with, you know?
I think that the automation and robots, if you will, these robots, there's a great piece by a woman named Carolina Miranda in the Atlantic in the last year or so, where she talks about how a lot of spaces that are being built for automation actually leave out a human space, and they always need to be mediated. These spaces, even though they leave out a space for humans to exist, they still put a human there to mediate the experience.
Yeah.
So you have these like super awkward humans like, you know, standing there with no space to stand to help you because it didn't work, you know, or something like that. This is, you'll see this all
at the airport too.
Yeah.
People assisting at the Delta
Everywhere.
self-check-in.
So I was just say to you, you know, when somebody's going to build a space like this, think about the human mediator, because they're going to be there for a long time, probably. And in some ways it solves your problem, because you can still have a human experience, but they don't necessarily need to be the one giving you the key, right? I mean, they can be there just to greet you and
Give you a bouquet of
answer
flowers.
questions, or what, give you a flower, give you a gift or whatever. But you all this other technical stuff's being dealt
Well, it's
with.
like it opens up, whenever you have a shift that has some automative solution, a new opportunity arises in the space, in the attention
great.
span. The eyes can shift somewhere different, the body can do something different, and those that can seek out that new opportunity in real time win. A good example is you come outside of a hotel, you used to have to go to the person that was at the front and have them flag a cab for you, right? And they, you know, whistle, or there'd be a line of cabs and whatnot. I still see that, but what I see a lot of is people, you know, looking at their phone to see when their Uber is going to arrive, and those people who stand in front of the hotel are becoming less and less frequent. So do you then change that role, or do you now incorporate other levels of technology, like a screen that can highlight all the Ubers that are in the area, you know, which is easily done.
Yeah, or a
Right?
screen that you stand behind that has your name on it.
Yeah, or, you know, whatever.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, something like
exactly.
that.
Yeah.
Who is jumping into that space as new opportunity is created,
I think it's
and then
brilliant.
coming up with the solution in real time?
I-
It doesn't have to be that solution is a solve for forever, because ultimately that space
keep going.
itself will be disrupted again shortly after,
Yeah.
but it's a sign of innovation.
Well, we have the flying cars from Uber.
Soon.
Anyway,
Yeah.
and with that, we have now predicted the future. And yeah, I think that's actually our panel for today. So I want to thank you all for
Thank you.
wonderful insights. And thank you, everybody, for sending in good questions. Thank you.